Leader of the Green Party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm glad to hear the Premier will today be finally responding to the deferrals announced by the Pacheedaht, Dididat and Huu-ay-aht First Nations in Fairy Creek. In the absence of leadership from this government, these three nations have stepped forward with deferrals on old-growth logging in their territories. Very amusing to the members of government. But let's be clear, it is this government's lack of leadership on forestry that has put First Nations in the middle of rising tensions in our forests and led to increased conflict and division in communities. I would suggest that the members check their email inbox to determine how serious this is to the people of British Columbia. Many questions remain about the deferrals in Fairy Creek, and I sincerely hope the Premier will be clearing up the uncertainty today. My question is to the Premier. Can we expect to hear confirmation from him that the province is approving at the least the deferral areas proposed by the nations, and that they will be providing full, no-strings-attached funding for Indigenous-led integrated stewardship plans developed by these nations?
Minister of Forest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question. I just need to clarify some of the misinformation that she has shared. The old growth strategic review was very clear that the government needed to engage in those really critically important government-to-government discussions with Indigenous nations, and that's what we have been doing. That's what we have been doing with nations across the province, and that's what we have been doing with the Pacheedaht, with the Huu-ay-aht, with the Dididat, to ensure, because as we have been saying, this is not about the government making deferrals. This is about working in collaboration with Indigenous nations. This is about making sure that when we know that there's old growth areas that potentially should be deferred, we have those really important conversations to ensure that that is the wishes of the people that have the rights and title to that land, the nations whose traditional territory it sits on. So we have been doing that work. And I can assure the member that we will be making announcements soon. And I am very happy I'm thrilled that we were able to have those really difficult conversations over months with many different people, because we have arrived at a place where we know that the nations, as the member has said, that these nations have said they would like these areas deferred, because that's what the process is about. That's how this should work. So I'm really glad that the member has raised this so that I could clarify that for the member and for the House. Thank you.
Leader of the Third Party Supplemental.
Curious to know, Honourable Speaker, whether those conversations happened before or after the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation signed the benefit agreement that secures the interest of the Crowns on resource extraction in these territories. We know, Honourable Speaker, it is not just Fairy Creek. Fairy Creek is a flashpoint, but logging in ancient forests is happening across the province, often without the consent of the nations on whose territory that logging is taking place. Earlier this session, we shared statements from just a few of the Indigenous leaders calling for an end to old-growth logging in their territories directly with this Minister and Premier, yet nothing has changed. Logging continues without their consent, despite this government's stated promises to reconciliation. David Knox, the hereditary chief of the Kwaikutl, was on CBC just this week talking about how his nation has called on the Premier for years to stop old-growth logging in their territory, and they continue to be ignored. Honourable Speaker, you can't pick and choose invoking reconciliation when it suits you and ignoring it otherwise. And I sure do hope that we will see the commitment that the chiefs of the Pacheedaht, Dididat, and Huu-ay-aht are asking for from this government, which is fully funding Indigenous-led stewardship plans on their territories with no strings attached. However, Honourable Speaker, my next question is also to the Premier. Will all the other nations that have been requesting deferrals but have so far been ignored be hearing from the government this week?
Minister of Forest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just to clarify, the government has received several requests from First Nations to implement deferrals, and we have responded to all incoming requests, and we are committed to working with them. And some of them we have already started that work. So I just want to make sure the member knows that. And the member is also right. We can't pick and choose when it comes to reconciliation, how we feel about a nation's wishes, about a nation's wants. And we all have to respect that, and we all have to work with those nations. And I too would like to quote some of the chiefs. And one thing I want to say is that the counselor, Chief Counselor Robert Dennis, he said that it is our responsibility to take care of our land for future generations. We are the decision makers. And he goes on to say, we follow the guidance of our elders and citizens to make the decisions we think are right. We are asking others to respect that process and follow our direction on our territory. Our citizens have a constitutionally protected right to manage and benefit from our lands, our water, and resources. And so, Mr. Speaker, I hope that people will respect the wishes of Indigenous nations. I hope that people will respect the words of the chiefs who have said, please work with us, please respect our wishes, because we are moving forward on what is happening with old growth in this province. We are moving forward because we know that we need to implement all 14 recommendations from the old growth report. We know that we are committed to the #1 recommendation of ensuring that we have those important government-to-government discussions with Indigenous nations, and we are doing this right. We are not rushing this. We are not doing this without due diligence and respect, because we know this has to be done properly, because this will affect people today and for generations to come.